in just a sec.
My name is Nicole Lenner, and I'm a master teacher. I teach high school biology and college now environmental science and middle school science over in McGraw, New York. And I have some students who will be joining us throughout the day today as well. I'm here to introduce to you our keynote speakers. So we have 4 dynamic speakers for you this morning to discuss the topics pertaining to our overlying theme, global crisis, local solutions. So I would like to introduce first Dr. Silje Kristiansen. Dr. Silje Kristiansen is an assistant professor at SUNY ESF. She is a communications scholar who will discuss what the media does and does not report and how this affects the public's perception of what they can do to solve the climate crises. Her speak today is entitled, "Does the media solely inform us that there is a climate crisis without letting us know what we can do to help avoid it?" So I would like to introduce Dr. Kristiansen, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Nicole Lenner, for the kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. It's great to see so many people coming out for this event. I want to thank the organizers for putting it on and for inviting me. I'm very excited to be meeting all of you today. So my name is Silje Kristiansen, and as Nicole said, I am an assistant professor at the State University of New York at the College of Environmental Science and Forestry, for short. That's SUNY ESF, and we're located in Syracuse, New York. So I'm sure you've heard in the mass media a lot about climate change, especially recently with the climate summit going on in Glasgow. And scientists tell us that there might still be a chance that we could avoid the worst of the climate change crisis and avoid it from getting much worse than it already is. I'm sure you see the media coverage of wildfires and flooding and sea level rise all across the globe in different areas. And for us to lessen this effect of the climate warming and changing, we need to see change on many different levels of society, including individual change. So what we as people and individuals can do in our everyday life. And that's what the summit is going to focus on today. So in my work as a teaching professor and also a researcher, I want to learn more about how we can bring about this change. How can we help people transition in their lives? And I'm especially interested in changes that individuals can take, because then you're not relying on politicians or decision makers or companies making changes. You can actually do a lot yourself. So to better understand this, in my research, I focus on how the mass media talks about climate change and climate change related issues. And this can include looking at how TV news, let's say I look at how CNN or Fox News or newspapers like New York Times, Wall Street Journal, how they cover climate change, how do they present climate change to their audiences. As a communication scholar that I am, so I work to expand our knowledge about how the crisis and the needed changes that people and society are covered by the media. So how do the media portray this to us? But why do I focus on the media? Right, well, think about it. Where do we get our information from? Where did you hear about the Glasgow Climate Summit that was just put on? Many times this information comes from the media, from journalists who report on these issues, right? You might have heard about it from your parents or for friends talking about it, but it's likely that they got the information from a journalist. And I see in my research, and many people with me, that people get their information, especially on environmentally related issues, through the media. So it's a very important source of information for many people. So that's part of my work, to investigate how the media reports on climate change. And the second part of my research, I think of it as two pillars on which I stand in my research. I look at what people think, people's perception. And we know that the media can influence which issues people think are important. So if the media talks a lot about a certain issue, people will start to think that this issue is important. So let us look at what we can do in our personal life to lessen our negative impact on the planet. I'm taking a step back here from my own research. So we can, for example, avoid driving a car. We can instead walk or ride a bicycle if we are not going very far. Let's say you're just going a couple of blocks away. That can lessen your impact on the planet. We can buy renewable energies to our houses. Maybe your parents have installed solar panels on their roof, or someone you know has done that. That's another way. A way that is easy to change, that is probably most accessible to most of the people here today, is that we can stop eating animals and their milk and their eggs. And I'm going to explain why this is even relevant. So a lot of resources go into food production for humans. And let's say we're thinking about a hamburger. So for that cow to live and grow, it needs to eat a lot of food, and that food needs to be grown somewhere, maybe on land where we could grow something else that human could directly eat. And also when cows live, or sheep, when they live, they release a lot of methane, which is very bad for the climate. So one of the changes, one of the local changes, as I like to think of me as like an individual in society, is that we can adopt a plant-rich or maybe even animal-free diet. And a balanced plant-based diet is perfectly healthy for you. Oftentimes it's even better for you than eating some of the other stuff. So if we focus on the negative environmental impact of food, there was a study published in Science. Science is a great academic journal where a lot of important studies are published. In 2018, they published a study that looks at food systems and how much they contribute to negative effects related to the environment. And they found that 26% of global greenhouse gas emissions, so in the entire world, 26% of greenhouse gas emissions come from food production. That is not only animal agriculture, that's all food production. And of those 26%, most of those 58% come from animal agriculture. That means putting a steak on your table, a hamburger, pork chops, chicken wings, all of that, milk, cheese, and stuff like that. So if we change the way we eat, we can reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 49% if we would be changing to a plant-based diet. But animal agriculture is not only bad for the climate, it also uses a lot of land, which I already mentioned. It contributes to acidification of our waterways and other things that are bad for the environment. So now back to my research. My own research shows that this diet shift, this one solution, this one way that we can lessen our negative impact on the planet, the media does not report a lot on this solution. The media tend to focus on the issue of climate change itself. It focuses a lot on economics and the politics around climate change. So remember back what I said, the more the media writes about something or reports about something, people are going to think that that is important. So if the media writes a lot about politics and economics when it comes to climate change, people are going to think that that is very important. The media does not focus a lot on solutions, what we can do in our everyday lives, especially what I've researched is plant-based diets. They do not write a lot about plant-based diets. So this might lead people to think that our food and what we eat doesn't have a negative impact on the planet, but I'm here to tell you otherwise. I also research what people think about and people's perception of different climate change related issues. And my research shows that local students, local to Syracuse, often report that they don't know exactly how to make this dietary change. Even if they want to, they feel they don't know how to. So even though the internet is bursting with information on how you can eat environmentally friendlier, students still report that they struggle to know how to make this change. So to conclude, since I as a researcher, I can research what journalists do, but I cannot change what they do. I cannot change the way they write about different issues. So what I can do in my work is to raise awareness to what we as individuals can do to help the planet. And one easy, accessible to most people change that we can make is to start just eating more plants. You don't have to exclude anything from your diet. You can just start using more plants. That includes lentils, beans, chickpeas, tofu, potatoes, rice, vegetables, fruits, and many other foods. And I think it would be important that people are aware of this, and maybe eventually the media will cover it and people will think that it's important to make this change. And I'm looking forward to your questions after the other presenters go, or if Nicole, if you're going to have questions now. Thank you very much for your attention and for the invitation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kristiansen. So students, if you have questions for Dr. Kristiansen, you can put them into the chat. Maybe Dr. Kristiansen, would you be willing to share some contact information out to their students and teachers?
Yeah.
Because it's always important for us to feel like we have an expert that we can go to ask our questions to.
Definitely. Yeah, I will share it in the chat.
Yes, thank you very much. Our next speaker today for our keynote is Shenequa Perry. Shenequa is a student at SUNY ESF. She started her journey as a high school student, just like many of you, attending a climate summit and completing projects. That grew into working with local government and making a larger difference in her own community. She has led the village of Homer on its path to becoming a bronze certified climate smart community. And her journey continues today as she continues to help make her village and college more sustainable. So thank you for joining us today, Shenequa. Her talk is entitled From School to Local Government. And I will turn it over to you, Shenequa. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. Hello, everyone. Like she mentioned, I am a senior now at SUNY ESF. This is my last semester, but I started off my work in climate change as a high school student at Homer. We went to climate summits similar to this, but in person at the time. And that's how we got the idea for most and our skills for most of the stuff that we did as high school students. Homer, I helped do a garden and solar panels for a little charging station. And after we finished those projects, we wanted to move to something a little larger because we didn't really know what the next step would be in our own school. So at the next climate summit we went to, Andrew Fagerheim went to one on climate smart communities run by Dazzle from the DEC. And he thought that was a wonderful idea and he wanted to get us involved in Homer. So we reached out to the mayor and asked him to come visit us at school, and we gave him a tour of the school and what we had been doing, and then we asked what we could do for him. Because in local government, a lot of the time, especially small ones like Homer, they may want to do something, but they might not have the time or people to make that happen or the skills to do so. So going to climate summits gave us great skills. The climate action plans you're going to create were very helpful. We did one for the village as well. So it goes beyond just your school. You can apply those same concepts to something larger like a local government. But from our meeting with the mayor, he was super excited. Homer had been registered as a climate smart community, but they hadn't had the resources or time to begin working towards certification in any real capacity. So he was super excited that we wanted to get involved. So we met with the Board of Trustees, and from that meeting, we ended up being the leaders of the Climate Task Force. And we've been leading that for 3 years now, I think it's been. And it's been a lot. They put us in charge, which there are other communities across New York State that are doing climate smart communities that have youth on their task forces. It's actually becoming a lot more common recently, which was awesome because you guys have a lot to offer. Saranac Lake, us in Homer, the town of Manlius, and some other towns down in the Hudson Valley have students on their task force, and they're a real asset. There's actually a video out that the DEC made with Homer and Saranac Lake about youth involvement. I definitely advise you go look at that in the future. You're definitely able to participate. All it took for us is to reach out to the mayor. Some communities are a little more difficult to work with. Ours was thankfully really open to youth involvement. So we led their path towards certification. They're now bronze certified. 2 summers ago, I was a summer intern to help speed that along. We made a climate action plan. Most of it was just collecting documentation at the time. Now we're trying to work towards actually implementing new projects. We had an intern from ESF actually this summer, who she made a complete streets policy for us. And now she's taking the next steps to kind of make a plan for the village to complete those steps. So local government is definitely something you can all get involved in. More and more youth are joining it. And it's a good place to start because they're usually people you might be familiar with in your town and not quite so scary of a concept as like going to your congressman or something. And it's something that you can do locally and you can impact the place where you live and make that more sustainable besides just your own life. There's a lot of, when you're working with the government, with the local government, there's a lot of, you don't have to be the leader of the task force. You can just sit on it and provide a perspective because that's very, very helpful. A lot of local governments, especially in this area, are more of an older generation. They don't really have youth voices in that. And it's a very important voice to have because we are going to be the ones to inherit this earth and the towns that we live in. So it's very important that we get involved. And if you ever wondering how to make that first step, I'm always willing to answer those questions. I've helped a couple other students get in contact with their mayor and start the process. So thank you all for listening. Let me know if you ever have any questions.
Thank you so much, Shenequa. Again, I would ask that if you would be willing to share your information for how students might be able to communicate with you, and you'd be willing to put that in the chat, that would be awesome. So thank you for making that connection for our students out there. As far as here is a live person from one of our school communities that's joining us today who took that step forward to start making some action via local government. And that's really probably the place to start, right? So making that small step forward. And as Shenequa said, it can be a little bit intimidating to think, oh, I've talked to my congressman or my congresswoman or my senator. Starting with maybe the mayor of your community would be more doable and seemingly something that would take it to the next level. So thank you, Shenequa, for sharing that. Next, I would like to introduce Donnie Monk. Donnie Monk is the co-founder of EcoThoughts, and she is also a neighborhood planner for the city of Syracuse. She grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and was exposed to a lot of changes in her own local government. Donnie said that Cleveland is known for its rich culture of gathering collectively and using art to communicate, taking a seat at the local political table to make changes. So in her session today, we'll learn more about how we can apply art and local politics and collective gathering effectively for sustainable community development. Donnie's title for her talk today is Local Sustainability Has No Boundaries. So now I would like to introduce to you Miss Donnie Monk.
Hi, good morning, everyone again. And thank you again to the Master Teachers team for putting this together and inviting me. I'm very honored to be here. Also, thank you, Beth and Nicole. Thank you for guiding this conversation. This has been very great to hear what everyone has to say. So a little bit about me is I'm actually from Cleveland, Ohio, and I began my journey in sustainability at a very young age as well as some of the other presenters. And I worked very closely with my local government, specifically with Mayor Frank Jackson in Cleveland. So a little bit about what I did during that time in high school is I worked alongside other college students while taking college courses such as environmental science. And we basically explored our community, and we got to analyze some of the sustainability projects that were implemented, and we got to rate them and suggest what should be changed. Doing this allowed for the city of Cleveland to actually be one of the best, in my opinion, but also scientifically, one of the best cities to model after for sustainable development. So yep, I took that knowledge and I came out here to New York, where I did my undergraduate work at the SUNY ESF, and I majored in environmental studies. And I did a lot of work at the university in which I helped to implement some things regarding ADA accessibility, which is also improving the environment for individuals. So I recently graduated last semester, and I started my role as a neighborhood planner with the city of Syracuse. And I'd even like to just comment, like Shenequa made very good points about how to engage with your local community. Starting from that local level with your mayor is always one of the best ways to kind of, I guess, get the conversation started and also get plans going when it comes to your community outreach. So you guys are all young and you have a long way to go, and you're going to be looking at college very soon, and you're looking at ways to get involved. So I do say look forward to that action plan that you guys are going to be working on. That's going to be really good. It's going to be really good training for you, especially if you want to go in any of the line of work that some of us are doing. So then a little bit about EcoThought, just kind of transitioning this conversation. EcoThought is an advocacy group located in Syracuse. It started up during the undergraduate time at ESF, and it was mainly just for memes and kind of at first getting together collectively with other students at the university. And then it kind of evolved over the years. It evolved into us doing community outreach, such as community cleanups, which we were able to partner with the mayor of Syracuse and get access to resources and also work with other community leaders. And it allowed us to even get to a point where we were able to feel comfortable with Senator Rachel May, and we were even on a podcast with her and can have those conversations about moving things along a little faster. So another thing about EcoThought too is we do believe in sustainable community gathering and et cetera. However, sometimes it can be difficult for people to actually get together sustainably. There's a lot of factors involved in that and why that may be a challenge, especially for certain communities. So EcoThought, basically, we try to provide these resources to communities that traditionally aren't able to transition as smoothly into sustainability. So one of the things that we provide is art and fashion, and also just a big, massive collection of upcycled materials. I'm not sure if you guys are aware of what upcycling is, but upcycling is a science and it's also an art. So it's when you take something that traditionally is unwanted, and you make it into something new that can be repurposed. It's repurposing something. So Eco Thought, we repurpose clothes, we repurpose jars, we repurpose earrings. I make these earrings I'm wearing from donations, but it's applying it on a local level where you can actually take your hobbies and also take your skill set in science and create something useful. And then the beauty of this is when you apply sustainability, that's a conceptual model, right? So we have the economy, we have the people, and we have the planet. So when you're doing something like upcycling, it's making your community more sustainable because you're allowing yourself to grow in a way where you have influenced the local economy because you're influencing, a chance for the economy to gain a new skill and to provide new jobs, or however that may be applied in your community if you do take on something like upcycling. And then people, when you do upcycle, you're allowing for items to be lower in cost. And traditionally, eco-friendly, sustainable items cost a lot of money. So Eco Thought was very intentional about making sure that we reduced the price of things to make sustainability more accessible to those communities. And then lastly, your environment. When you don't take things straight to the trash and you create that cradle to cradle, basically the concept of not throwing things away, reusing something. So when you apply cradle to cradle versus the cradle to grave concept, you're able to see your community grow. That means like your carbon footprint is reduced. A lot of things like, going vegan is great. And it's very healthy for an individual, but sometimes those resources just aren't available in your community. So doing things like upcycling is allowing yourself to be sustainable with the boundaries that are within your local community. So as far as, local politics, collective gathering, and any questions about Eco Thought, I will be here to answer any of those. You can throw them in the chat, and I will also put my contact information in the chat alongside our website, which you can find blogs and also any instruction manuals on how to create some of Eco Thought items, such as like beeswax wraps. So yes, that's all I have for you all today. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Donnie. So in that particular sense, right, those are things we could do today, right? So those are things we could do today. We could go home, we can look for things that potentially have the promise for being repurposed. That's something maybe you could take back to your environmental clubs, working with them for an activity after school, finding some ideas for different upcycling activities. That's something that we have done in the past as well for the Youth Climate Summit. As a matter of fact, last year, we had a variety of upcycling activities, and I'm always looking for new ideas, Donnie, for upcycling. So share those out, girl. So we love them, and the kids love them. And we actually are hosting, McGraw's hosting a really free market in the next couple of weeks where we're trying to foster just reuse, just in general, not necessarily upcycling, but just the reuse of household items and clothing and home decor and so on and so forth. So very cool. Thank you so much. The next speaker that we have for you today is Jessica Proctor. Jessica Proctor is a Master's of Science student currently at ESF. Jessica says that as an individual, there are many actions we can take to live more sustainably, implementing composting and waste reduction programs in our schools and universities, working outreach in our communities, and inspiring others to follow a similar path. It's also important to understand our actions as individuals only go so far. She says to shift our society to a more sustainable future, it's imperative that elected officials and those in power understand our need for change. And young voices, she believes, are the key in this dialogue. We are fighting for our future. As a matter of fact, the title of Jessica's talk today is Fighting for Our Future, Sustainable Actions and Holding Those in Power Accountable. So I would like to introduce to you next, Miss Jessica Proctor.
Hello, thank you so much for that awesome introduction. I do have a few slides to share. Am I able to share my screen?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Let me make sure that All right. Is everyone able to see that okay?
We are. Thank you.
Awesome. I've been doing this for a year and I still am not sure if I know how to use Zoom. So thank you so much for having me today, everyone. I'm Jess Proctor. As Nicole mentioned, I am a master's student at SUNY ESF. I'm actually studying conservation biology and focused on squirrels, but I have a big background in sustainable actions, and I want to talk to you all a bit today about how we can fight for our future. So one thing that I'm sure many of you have heard, and I've heard far too often as a young person engaged in climate action, is that I'm just too young to understand why things are the way they are, why they can't change. I've heard that starting when I was in middle school and I first became engaged in this, and I continue to hear it now as a 22-year-old graduate student in this field. So, but I started to realize, right, that this is a tool used to try to suppress young voices when they're maybe saying things that are making older people a little bit uncomfortable. So I have one key response to that. Okay, boomer. Just kidding. I do not recommend any of you actually say that. I would never, but now I have your attention. So all jokes aside, in a survey by the UN, 73% of youth said that they were currently feeling the effects of climate change in some way. I'm guessing since all of you are here today, you probably relate to that statement somehow. So I think this is really important, right? That's a significant number. And it proves, right, we're never too young to know there's an issue, and we're never too young to start fighting to change that issue. So what can you do as a young person to address the climate crisis, right? Obviously, that's why we're all here today talking about. I found the most useful in this fight, which is using your voice, right? So most of you, probably all of you, are too young to vote at this point. That doesn't mean that you can't be engaged and use your voice. So the focus today, I'm going to split really into two sections, which is sustainability and then accountability. So sustainability starting, right? I'm guessing if each one of you took a minute to think, you could identify a place in your life that could be doing better for our planet. Whether that be the energy efficiency in buildings or transportation or services in your community or your school, consumption, right? So what products are we using? What companies are they coming from? Are they actual sustainable? Are they allies with the planet? And then waste. So what's being thrown away? Does it need to be thrown away? And then what's happening to it once we do toss it, right? So my background has been really focused on waste reduction. That's where a lot of my sustainability focuses have been. So like Shenequa, I was really involved in my local community in high school and also community college where I went before I transferred to ESF. So I'm from Trumansburg, which is a small town near Ithaca. And my parents actually own a composting business. It's called Cuba Compost. And I was really engaged in high school. I actually coined the nickname Queen Compost. So that's what a lot of my teachers would call me. So I worked a lot with community outreach, teaching people how to compost and why it was important. Taking food scraps from community members and bringing them to the composting system to keep them out of the landfill. And of course, that's not something that would be feasible in every community. Not everyone has these facilities, but it's still possible and pretty easy to set up a community composting system, which I'm happy to share resources with and talk about more if anyone was interested. And then moving on, coming to ESF, I continued to stay really engaged in these sustainable actions. I served as the vice president of our Green Campus initiative here. And I worked a lot with compost outreach and education. We recently just introduced a composting system on ESF's campus. I also worked on a team to reduce plastic waste on campus. So as of last year, ESF no longer has plastic bottles in our vending machines. We only use aluminum cans, which have less of an environmental impact, which is super exciting. And then along with Shenequa, who she's actually in the picture here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but holding the bag, we helped plan and host a waste conference on campus. We brought over 100 people from the Northeast. This was before COVID. We can see the mask-free picture, a weird, eerie time pre-COVID. But So we hosted all these people and we talked about waste and we led workshops, brought in experts. It was a day-long event. There was about 100 people. We fed all of them, and that bag was the only waste produced the entire event, which was really exciting. But still, I find it frustrating as an individual to take all of these actions and fight so hard to try to make our planet healthier when we have these huge companies that are really the ones making the biggest impacts, right? So what can we do as an individual to fight these companies? One thing you can do is be a smart consumer, right? So who do you want to support? I made a pledge recently to try to buy everything either locally, secondhand, or from a small business, which is not easy on a graduate student budget, but I'm trying my best. But of course, there's more that we can do too. What we really need is to hold people in power accountable. Just like sustainability though, accountability can happen on the local level. I'm not saying you have to call up President Biden and tell him to start making changes in order for things to change, right? In order to make a difference. You can start at your school. You can start with local officials like Shenequa and Donnie mentioned. Or you could even, if you're feeling comfortable and happy about it, you can talk to elected officials in your district of New York. So really just think about where what sustainability could be improved in your life. And I'm going to guess that in most of those cases, you are not the one calling the shots. You're not making the decisions on how energy is being used. And a lot of the time, you're not the one buying products that are being used. But you do have access to the people who are. So you could push your school to implement a better waste system or composting system. You could write to your local government and express the importance for climate action. Or better yet, you could go to these officials, whether it be people on your school board, whether it be, like we said, New York State senators, and talk to them about why these issues are important to you. Like we said, many of you cannot vote, but you're never too young to write a letter. You could always be involved in a youth lobby day, or you could just meet with people on individual levels. As an example of this, and this is a kind of extreme but fun example, in 2019, I actually went to Albany with a youth lobbying group called Our Climate. And we talked to elected officials about the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which was ultimately passed in 2019, which is super exciting. Basically, this is just an act that outlines climate goals for New York State. And it's the most aggressive climate plan in the country. So New York State is really a leader. And you can see some of those goals outlined in the diagram on the left. But one thing, it's great, to have these goals, but the act itself doesn't outline how we're actually going to get there. So great, and youth were really involved. You can see the picture on the right is a group of young people who were at Albany that day, and also fighting for this. So we had a huge voice. But like we said, there's no plan of how we're actually going to get there. So that's just an example where all of you could come in, right? Push people in power and tell them this is what you want and things that these are things that need to happen, and support agendas that are actually going to make goals possible. And of course, this is an extreme example, right? You don't have to go to Albany to make an impact. This is just an example of something that I've done. But Shenequa and Donnie both gave examples of things on smaller levels that can have just the same impact. So then in summary, according to the UN, there are 1.2 billion youth in the world. So those are people from 10 to 19 years old. That makes up almost 20% of the world's population. So imagine if all of you used your voice to fight for a healthy, sustainable, and friendly future. It would be impossible to ignore you. Thank you. So this slide has my contact information, which I'm happy to leave in the chat as well. Feel free to contact me with any questions or resources. I'm happy to talk about composting systems, tools to get more engaged in government, organizations to help you with lobbying if that's something you're interested in. So like I said, feel free to contact me and I will throw these in the chat as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jess. So I think it's really exciting to connect with another composter. So a lot of times, Jess, for our action plans, students will come up with the idea that they want to compost in their schools. And there can be a lot of obstacles. So shout out to Jesse Kearns, who's going to be in the next session. So Jesse has assisted me personally in our environmental club with composting in the school, but it's always great to have more resources. So those of you that are thinking maybe that's a route that you want to take for action planning, can reach out to Jess now. She would be another great contact for that. So thank you so much for sharing that out, Jess. We actually have a few minutes before we need to start thinking about attending our next session. So if there is anyone who would like to pose any live questions right now, so you could just unmute. And we have our 4 speakers, I think, are still present here, our 4 keynotes. Any takers?
So I do have a question for Dr. Kristiansen. I've done a lot of research as well on plant-based diets and try to have my diet focused as much as possible on that. What advice would you give to a young person if they would like to start moving towards a plant-based diet or a vegetarian or a vegan lifestyle?
Okay, that's a great question. I would start with looking at a couple of interesting Instagram accounts. I posted one that I like that shows some recipes that you could make yourself or make together with friends or with your parents. One thing that I would very much emphasize to you is a plant-based diet does not have to be expensive. You do not have to go and buy expensive processed food. What do I mean with processed food? Like that's like the vegan cheeses can be expensive, like vegan hamburgers can be expensive. Everything that is like, there goes a lot of work into making that product. You can make amazing food. Like think about the meatloaf, but instead it's made with lentils and tomatoes and spices and things like that. That is, if you stay closer to what we call whole foods, the way that the foods would like grow in the field, like lentils, that's how they are on the plant. Vegan cheese, that doesn't grow on a plant. But the closer you stay to like the origins of the food, like rice and potatoes, sweet potatoes, vegetables, beans, you know, you could buy dry ones if you want to buy in bulk and reduce your waste at the same time, or you can buy them already boiled in a can. That's one advice that I would make, to keep this way of eating like cheaper often than eating animal-based foods. And definitely cheaper than reaching for that vegan cheese or that vegan burger or pizza or things like that. Doesn't mean that you cannot have those things, but you can make them with whole food ingredients. So look up recipes on Instagram or TikTok. There are so many people posting recipes. If you have any questions, just reach out to me. I'm happy to help.
Thank you so much.
I think sometimes for our students, it takes experience for them to realize the value in these contacts that you've potentially made today. So our 4 guest speakers are a wealth of information, and they're putting their information out there for you, their contact information. So my advice to you would be to tag these somewhere, keep them somewhere, these contacts, where when you are working on a project now, or maybe in the future, you have an actual person that's willing to guide you, right? And to potentially answer questions and support, some of your ideas. That's a huge resource that you have gained today. So, and with experience, you will realize the wealth of a contact. So, are there any more questions? I'll take another second here to see.
I have a question. Yep. This is about the plant-based diet. Well, I definitely think we need to eat more plants and certainly unprocessed foods because the whole food industry and the packaging and all that. we did have a master teacher event where we watched this thing on Netflix. It was called Kiss the Ground.
Mm.
And it was about grass, like ruminants, like eating the grass. Somehow, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys, but the idea of this, like kind of these biodiverse farms that actually help with drawdown, help with carbon sequestration. So I guess my question is, if you can, I mean, and it's expensive, if you could eat that local plant-based meat and, you know, and plants, is that kind of, I would think that would be better than like, you know, processed vegan food that's coming from a monoculture.
Yeah, so
This is something I struggle with. I don't eat processed vegan food. I eat meat. I eat, you know, from local farmers. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, buying local is always good for many different reasons, including like supporting your local economy and people who live in your neighborhoods and in your communities. When it comes to food, though, and if you look at the breakup of where do the greenhouse gas emissions come from different foods like meat or if it's plants, if we look at, let's take meat products or dairy products, very little of that greenhouse gas emissions, that entire greenhouse gas emission chunk, comes from the transport from, let's say, a farm in Brazil to us in New York. It's like around 11% of the greenhouse gas emissions connected to meat products that actually come from transportation of feed, transportation of the animals to the slaughterhouse, transportation of the meat packaged from the slaughterhouse or the meat packing company to our grocery stores and then to your fridge. So because most of the greenhouse gas emissions come from the farming practice, like a cow that eats grass on a field or a cow that is in a concentrated feeding lot getting fattened up before slaughter, they still emit a lot of methane. Doesn't really matter where they are like placed so much. So it's always a good idea to buy local for many different reasons. But if you're concerned about greenhouse gas emissions, it's always better to reach for the vegan whole foods, the plant-based foods that are whole foods, not processed food. Processed foods are not good for your body. If they are plant-based or if they are not plant-based, they are never good for your body. They contain so many substances that make them stay fresh longer, and they stay in our body and they influence our bodies as well. So eating just whole foods is the best for you and for the planet.
Thank you for that question, and thank you for the response. Are there any more questions? We have like another maybe 2 minutes we could squeeze out here. Yes, Donnie.
Totally unrelated, but I just wanted to say that it always like scrapes my mind, but our founder for EcoThought actually created a game called Green Handed on our website. So when you go to ecotought.com, you can play it mobile and also you can play it on your web browser, but it's a recycling game. It's really cool. It's currently in the process of being put into an application for the App Store, but it's a fun game and I do encourage you to share it with any of your younger siblings. It's a very informal way to learn how to recycle. So thank you again.
Thank you for that. A lot of us, the master teachers, also work with middle school students, and there may be some middle schoolers here today, actually. So thank you for that. So this has been an awesome kickoff to our summit. Great energy, great ideas. So thank you so much. There's nothing really more valuable than someone can donate than their time. So I appreciate the time that all of our presenters spent in preparation for today, and for also taking the time to be with us today. So moving on to our next session. Our next session begins at 10:10 and runs until 10:55. We have 2 different sessions that you can choose from. The links are found on the spreadsheet. So one of the talks is entitled Strength in Numbers, Finding Your Place in the Climate Movement. And that is being given by Alison, Mullan-Stout, and Avni Pravin from the Alliance for Green Energy. And then the second session that goes along at 10:10. So the other one that you could choose from is the climate change solution that's sitting on your plate. And that will be from Jesse Kearns from the SU Center for Sustainable Community Solutions. So once again, thank you all for the presenters that took their time today to speak to us and be with us here today. And also to all of the young people who took their time today to join us. It's been a busy week. It's a busy time of the year right now. You took a Saturday morning. That says a lot about your dedication to the topic and about your character as a whole, that you're spending your Saturday morning as a young person with all of the different things that you could be doing, and you took your time today to be with us. So kudos to you and thank you for that. So without further ado, you can move on to the next session. Again, we have about a 10-minute time span, so maybe people would like to just take a break from the screen or get a drink or use the restroom, and you have time to do that. The next session doesn't start until 10:10. So thank you all, and we'll see you throughout the day. Enjoy the day.
Nicole,
Thank you,
I have a
everyone.
question.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Yeah, this was awesome. Nicole, got it. Okay. I would like to welcome our guest speakers, Alison Mullan-Stout. Please correct me if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, and Avni Pravin. They are from the Alliance for Green Energy. And this is I'm just, from the website, and from Andra, who couldn't be with us, sent me a description of the talk. But the Alliance for Green Energy is a diverse group. It is scientists. They bring together a diverse group, scientists, activists, artists, musicians, to work to change a broken energy system. And they will speak to us today more about this system and how to make a positive change. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. And it's really great to see so many people here today. Hopefully we can, give you a little peek into what we do, and also a little peek into how we got where we are. Sometimes that can help people figure out their own path. And we just want to be helpful. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. So give me 1 second to get set up. All right. And just as I'm doing this, I'm not able to see the chat. So Anna, if anyone pops something into the chat that you'd like me to address, then, feel free to just stop me wherever I am. So yeah, let's just go ahead and get
Alliance
started.
for Green Economy. Sorry, I got the agree wrong. But
No
I get your
worries.
emails and I do the action thing. So I try to be on the right side of this.
I feel like Alliance for Green Energy is still pretty close to what we do, as you'll all see soon. So as Anna mentioned, we're talking today about strength in numbers and how people can find their place in the climate movement, because as Anna mentioned, it's such a diverse space. We have all kinds of people here, and hopefully this will give you a chance to see, where your skills can really fit into working for climate justice. So we'll just kind of do a quick overview. We're going to talk a little bit about who we are, both Alison and I individually, and then who Agree is. Talk a little bit about what policy advocacy looks like. I think, that term is thrown around a lot. And honestly, before I started working at Agree, I don't think I would have been able to concretely tell you what that actually pertains to. We'll talk a little bit about why activism works and how we've won in the past. we'll try and give you a little sense of what are some skills that you can contribute to the climate movement. We'll talk a little bit about what we're up to next, and then we'll do a fun surprise closing. Okay, so who is AGREE? In brief, we do a lot. We do a lot of different work in a lot of different areas. But basically what we want to see is a New York that's powered by safe, clean, and affordable energy that doesn't endanger our climate or our Earth's inhabitants. And the long version of this is that we intervene in statewide proceedings. So that means that we show up as parties to cases that are being adjudicated by the Public Service Commission. I know that's a lot of terminology right there, but basically the Public Service Commission is an entity that oversees the way that laws are implemented by our utilities. So if you know who like National Grid is or Con Edison, they're the people that we pay our energy bills to. They're regulated by state agencies, and often we participate in these proceedings as kind of a public watchdog to make sure that our laws are being implemented correctly and that our consumers are being protected. We also write legislation at times, and we work with elected officials to get it passed. We research, uncover, and publicize information that we know the fossil fuel industry would rather hide. We also publicize misinformation that the fossil fuel industry purposefully puts forward. We work in coalitions to mobilize people concerned about climate change to take action. And Alison is really going to talk a lot about how we find power in numbers and power in grassroots coalitions. And we also work at local levels to bring home heating solutions to people who need them most, because we know that the energy transition to renewable energy should be one that people can afford and one that's equitable. So we're ensuring that our most vulnerable residents are protected. So let's move on to talking a little bit about who we are. So I'm going to pass the mic to Alison, who can introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Alison Mullan-Stout. I use she, her pronouns. And Avni and I were both talking about how our paths to get to where we are in the climate movement were a little, they weren't a straight path. So I studied psychology in undergrad. I went to Clark University in Massachusetts, but I loved activism. I got really involved there and found an organization locally called Citizens Campaign for the Environment and worked with them for 6 years as a door-to-door organizer, because I love talking to people. For me, it was psychology, actually, to be out there talking to people, getting a sense of why people cared. You know, was it the park down the street? Was it having clean water for their kids? Was it really thinking about our future and the future of our kids and grandkids? So there's a lot of reasons why people might get involved, and that really gave me a sense of the vast number of reasons locally all across central New York that people care and want to get involved and want ways to get involved that maybe they can't get out knocking doors, but they can write a letter or they can make a donation or they can make a phone call. So that was really empowering to be able to see people light up and people be given that way of getting empowered. I also worked as a trainer with the organization and a staff director, helping other young activists to get into the movement and to get even more politicized, which was a really amazing experience for me. And I just recently started working with Alliance for a Green Economy with the Heat Smart CNY program. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but essentially it's house by house, building by building, getting folks the access to information that they need and the support that they need to make sometimes pretty big financial decisions to switch to geothermal or to heat pumps and to different ways of heating and cooling our homes, which is a really big impact on the climate. So that's been really great to work with them. And I also work with the Syracuse Community Choir. I'm a singer-songwriter. And so I love that the local choir sings songs of peace and justice. So that's another way to get involved, is to get involved with art. And there's a children's and a teen and an adult choir. So if anyone likes singing, you don't have to be good, you just have to like singing. So that's another thing that I like to tell people. You can get involved that way too. So we do things with with climate and with all sorts of other social justice issues. So yeah, I'll hand it back over to Avni.
Thanks, Alison. Yeah, and just to build off of what Alison was saying, I think I similarly had a very curved line journey to where I am today in public policy. I actually started by working in outdoor environmental education. So for a little bit, I worked in California doing snorkel tours and kayak tours for the YMCA and kids that just wanted to learn more about marine biology and learn more about our oceans and why we should care about them and how climate change is changing our oceans. And then after that, I kind of wanted to get more of a grounding in public policy. So I studied climate change and public policy at the UO while I did my master's there. And that was really, I think, one question that activists ask each other a lot when we're trying to understand each other's origin stories is, what radicalized you? What brought you to the climate movement and brought you to this place where you're really understanding the systemic injustice of our current systems and the way that systemic racism and classism are embedded in our systems. What brought you to that conclusion? And I think being at a university and getting really involved with my labor union, that's what brought me there. So through kind of these multitude of experiences, I realized I wanted to do more with climate justice, and I just joined Agree this year in February. So in other words, I'm still learning a lot. I'm still getting my feet under me. And so hopefully I can share a little bit about what I've been learning with you all. All right. So we have a quick reflection. Alison, I don't know if you want to lead this one.
Sure, I can do that. Well, we wanted to ask everyone. I mean, you're here for a reason. Maybe you were roped into it by somebody. But we all have our different angles, like Avni said, that we all have our different angles for why we care and why this matters to us. And it matters to all of us, but we all have different reasons, I think, that are the primary reasons. So I'm going to read through two quotes that I found that I liked. But in the meantime, I would love for anybody to put in the chat just anything that comes to mind for why you might care about this issue. So I've got a quote from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. "We don't have time to sit on our hands as our planet burns. For young people, climate change is bigger than election or re-election. It's life or death." And from Greta Thunberg, "Adults keep saying we owe it to the young people to give them hope, but I don't want your hope. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day. I want you to act. I want you to act as you would in a crisis. I want you to act as if the house is on fire, because it is." So I see that no one's putting anything in the chat yet, which is fine. But even if you just reflect on it for a moment, what kinds of things, motivate you or make you feel inspired and kind of urgency too. It's not just about being inspired or hopeful. It's about feeling that sense of urgency. And the world around us is not acting like there's an emergency. So I definitely vacillate between just living my life and feeling fine and then really understanding the dire situation that we're in. So if in the next couple of minutes anyone feels inspired to put something in the chat about why you care, go ahead and do that. But otherwise, just contemplate. Yes, thank you. Yeah, exactly. Climate change weirdly affects everything. Mass migration, wars, pandemics, economic collapses. Yep, it's woven into everything. It's intersectional. Exactly. We have to build the world that we want. It's happening right now. Absolutely. Yes. Thank you for sharing. And you can continue to put things in the chat as they come to mind. But we appreciate you weighing in. It does help to have a little bit of a conversation, a little bit of weigh in and back and forth. So thanks.
Yeah, and definitely don't feel like as we move on with the slides that folks can't continue to pop things in the chat as you think of them. Right. So this question of what is policy advocacy? It's really such a broad topic because it can really mean everything from mass mobilizations to holding a press conference, as you see, Agree joining with our allies here and joining with elected officials, our New York elected officials, Senator Brian Kavanaugh and Assemblymember Emily Gallagher, both Brooklyn elected officials. But as you can see here, we joined them for a press conference to talk about the All Electric Building Act. So policy advocacy can be something where you're getting in the public eye with elected officials to kind of win over hearts and minds. And then another way to advocate for a specific policy is reaching out to the public. And this can often be a really fun way to get involved with the climate movement, because you're allowed to be creative, you're allowed to incorporate art, you're allowed to incorporate music. You can really, I mean, you can incorporate pop culture, and it's just a lot of fun to brainstorm and be in allyship with other people who care about what you care about while you're making something really creative and really engaging with the public. So as you can see here, this was a campaign to stop fracked gas storage and stop trucked fracked gas through New York. And it's kind of analogizing Star Wars and this fight against renewables that are being pushed by the corporate utility companies, because of course renewable energy threatens their business model and threatens their profit motive. So this was like a fun way to illustrate that. And I think that, yeah, just the chance to be creative, there are so many in policy advocacy. Another way that you can advocate for policy is by writing op-eds. If you're a writer, if you're really passionate about a specific change that you want to see in New York policy, or a specific change that you want to see in your state or even at your local level, an op-ed is a great way to do that, because it really engages with a wide group of people. And people read op-eds, especially our elected officials, and that's often how they take a lot of direction for, okay, what's in the public mind right now. And I think the other thing that's important to recognize with policy advocacy is there's always a strategy to it, or one hopes that there's always a strategy to it. And there's always different actions for different situations. And so sometimes, as I mentioned, you want to win hearts and minds, and sometimes you have to cause a ruckus. And we have a couple of videos. I'm going to see if I can get them to work and show you all. Anna, if you wouldn't mind, as I'm pulling this up, if you can't hear the audio, just let me know.
Okay.
Are you able to see the screen right now?
Yes,
Okay.
definitely.
Great. All right, so this was an action that a number of activists took in 2019 after Con Edison filed what's called a joint proposal. So in plain English, a joint proposal, it was their plan for the next 3 years for how they want to handle energy rates that people have to pay, so the amount that you have to pay on your monthly bill, how they wanted to plan for gas infrastructure, which we know that if we're going to comply with our climate laws and if we're going to lower our greenhouse gas emissions, we have to stop building gas infrastructure. And in this joint proposal, they were proposing to raise rates when energy is already unaffordable for a large majority of New York's population. And they were also proposing to build new gas infrastructure. So this was, wholly unacceptable to people that care about equity and people that care about climate change. And so people stormed the Public Service Commission meeting, and then you can see what ended up happening.
Avni, the sound's not coming through on my end.
Okay, let's see if I can fix that. Oh, here we go. Share sound.
There you go.
Okay. All right, so as you can see, civil disobedience definitely has a place in the climate movement. I think there's a lot of ways that we have to show that the public is, displeased with the way that state agencies, corporate utilities, all kinds of entities, with the way that they're implementing our climate laws. And yeah, it's definitely important to raise our voices in that manner. And then there's also situations in which we want to, play by the political process. And that's also a strategy that you can employ, working with elected officials, building relationships with them. That's all a part of it as well. So, and sometimes, as you can see with Jessica, our executive director, sitting on the floor and printing something out, sometimes, we're activists that have to make the best use of our resources and be scrappy and be resourceful. I think this is on the floor of the Capitol in Albany during a lobby day. So lobby days are when you meet with elected officials and really hold a lot of meetings to talk about your legislation or talk about important climate priorities. And so there's a lot of room for people. If you like to talk to different groups of folks and like to build relationships, that's hugely important as well. But the bottom line is, with all these strategies, we have to be in coalition, one with our allies in the climate movement, but also with those who are most affected by climate change, because we know that climate change impacts people of color, low-income communities, and people who are maybe more vulnerable, like older adults and children. So we have to be thinking about how our policies are going to affect those groups, especially because, as we know, climate change deepens those pre-existing disparities. Another way that it's important to think about policy advocacy is it's not just one piece of the process, it's kind of a start to finish process. So not only are you writing these policies or programs or legislation, but you're also working with impacted groups, as I mentioned before, to identify issue areas. So what is it that people care about? What is it that there's popular support for? And then even after you get it passed, you have to ensure proper implementation. So you have to look at our state agencies, you have to look at our utilities, you have to look at the different corporations that are in play in the state to understand how are our laws being implemented, maybe how they're being avoided, how are people finding loopholes. And then from there you react. So you either organize for an escalation. So as you saw in that video, that was an example of an escalation, right? That our climate laws were not being upheld. And so we had to resist that. But then there's also room for giving feedback to programs and policies. Maybe there's a way for them to be improved, and maybe there's a way that we can work with state agencies to do that. And I think this is just part of what I mentioned earlier, that it's a start to finish process. But when you're doing policy advocacy, it's often offense and defense. So not only are you trying to get ahead of things and pass new laws and pass new programs and policies, but you also have to be on the defense. So what are our corporate utilities trying to do that's going to be harmful to our climate or to our residents? And then we have to resist those as well. And I just really love this poster by Ricardo Morales Levens, because it well, it says environmental justice is our cry of defense against the onslaught of oppressive toxins and toxic oppressions that threaten to submerge our homes. And if anyone is unfamiliar with the term environmental justice, I think this is a really great illustration of it, where we're all in the system where we are kind of being, our livelihoods are being threatened by both the threat of climate change, but also the threat of the fall of democracy, because our corporate utilities would rather that we don't participate in these systems, and would rather that they get to make the laws and they get to make the rules that they play by, and that all is like this intertwined oppression that we're facing down, but working together and crying out for environmental justice and working together to organize against that. Yeah, that is of dire need right now. And I'm going to pass it to Alison to talk a little bit about how that organizing works.
Great, thanks. So Avni will talk more about this specific project, but we recently signed on to a letter that over 200 organizations signed on to. It's a letter to Governor Hochul, calling on her to electrify at least 2 million homes by 2030. So I guess generally thinking about grassroots organizing, often you have to take a lot of strategies. You have to work from the ground up and as well as from the top down, right? Like that's working from the ground up, working with all of these different organizations and a lot of other people who have signed on to that letter. But we're also asking for policies to be implemented. So the Heat Smart program, there's a number of different Heat Smart programs across the state. We work with the Central New York one, we work with the 5 counties locally. And we really are, we're doing outreach to individuals and, to homeowners and business owners. And so in that way right now, we're getting into like some specifics, but the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning HVAC systems are the second largest source of pollution in New York State. They account for 32% of greenhouse gas emissions. So that's after the transportation sector. So we need to do something about it, right? And right now we really are, we're calling upon individuals, we're asking people to make individual decisions as consumers. And, it works to an extent. There's a lot of people who have switched over since 2018, just in the CNY, these 5 counties, we've helped 150 homes to improve energy efficiency with heat pumps or improved insulation. So that all adds up, that adds up in terms of their energy costs. It adds up in terms of, having a smaller demand for what we need as far as energy in the first place. And then it also means that they're using electricity instead of fossil fuels in the same way. They're switching from gas or propane. So that means we have less fracked gas in the region. And so I think sometimes there's within the fight, it can be very incremental and it can feel like, okay, well, we did that one thing, but how does that really look like a big victory? And I think that the answer really is doing all the things to the extent that we can. Like, we don't have to do each of the things, but I think, organizers in general have to do each of the things, have to cover all of the ground. So yeah, but then we also, like I said, we're working on that level of getting state or federal government to have incentives, to have requirements. So within the next decade, it will switch from, right now we're asking people, hey, do you think you would potentially switch to, within the next decade, the New York State will switch to a requirement that any new building or any changes to buildings, you'll be required to have that, to have those newer systems and to switch off of fossil fuels, which is great, right? But in the next decade, then we're working on a consumer-wide basis. We're marketing to people and saying, here are the benefits, and there's a lot of benefits. These systems are newer, smarter systems. You can hook them up to your smartphone. They make your whole home more comfortable. They're filtering air, so that's another reason people are getting more interested in them now as well. So it's really interesting, though. You also see the spin that the other side is putting on things. and they're saying, oh, they won't work in the winter. Well, actually, there's technology where they can work in the winter, or you have a backup system that you use a couple days of the year. So there's a lot of, we're not just up against, say, the financials of people's situations. There's also a lot of government programs that that give people grants and low interest loans so that people can make that switch. So it's not perfect. We're still missing a lot of people who, maybe don't have the finances or the time to do that. But we're on the right track, and we're working from the bottom up and from the top down. And yeah, right. So advocating for those incentives to be as high as they possibly can be, while also working on the ground with people to make sure that they can receive them. It's sort of all encompassed within that process. Next slide. And this is just to show kind of the human side behind all of it. Some houses and some humans who have switched from their old systems to a new heat pump, air source or ground source heat pump. And look, they look so happy. But it, as you start to see, okay, it adds up, and there's more than just me. There's more than just one person doing this. And these are all people who are helping to fight climate change, with this home decision that they made. So, and people are motivated by different reasons. There's a couple who their furnace died in the middle of winter, and that was why they switched. Or, they were also motivated by stopping climate change, but that was a big motivator for them. So you see how people kind of come at it from different angles. Some people aren't thinking about climate change at all in that decision, but they are ultimately helping in the fight. So I will hand it back over to you, Avni. You're muted.
Oops, sorry, I was on mute. So I want to talk a little, I skipped a few slides because I think those are related to what our wins are, but I want to talk a little bit about why activism works and what we've won through activism. And it's really exciting when you are working on a campaign for so long with so many people, talking to so many different officials, both at the state agencies and both our legislators, and then actually see the results of that come out. And I think it's important to talk about our wins too, because a lot of times people will try and downplay the influence that activists have over a political process. But it's important to recognize that, building relationships with legislators works, civil disobedience works, grassroots campaigns works. It all works together, which is, again, how, you can find your place in the climate movement, even if you're working on a small piece of it, because it's also necessary. So one of the ways that we've won recently is we're getting our corporate utilities to decrease our usage of gas. And like I mentioned earlier, if we're going to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, we have to electrify and we have to move our utilities off of using fracked gas and distributing fracked gas to homes. And we've actually been able, in a number of proceedings at the statewide level, we've been able to get our utilities to agree to decrease their gas sales, which is huge, because basically what we're asking businesses to do is to stop selling a product, which of course is not a great business model to stop selling your thing, but it's what has to happen if we're going to have a livable climate. Another win is that we've blocked the increase of already unaffordable energy rates in some of these cases. So for example, the Central Hudson utility that is located in the Central Hudson region of New York, they wanted to increase their rates, and that would have resulted in an increase of something like 6% on people's energy bills, which, if you are already burdened by your energy bills, which is the case for a lot of New Yorkers, in fact, there's over $1.2 billion in energy debt right now in New York. A lot of it is due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but a lot of that debt existed before the pandemic. So we already know that our energy rates are unaffordable for low-income families. So that's why it's really important to block the increase of these energy rates, and get our utilities to actually pay more into the system. Another way that we've won is Indian Point is now closed. And so that might mean something to some of you, but for those of you that are unfamiliar with it, Indian Point is a nuclear reactor that's located just south of Peekskill, New York, in a place called Buchanan. And it was about 36 miles from Manhattan, which a number of studies have come out on Indian Point, showing that if there was a failure at the plant, meltdown could have stood to affect people within a 50-mile radius of Indian Point. So all those people in Manhattan and New York City, all those people in Buchanan, within a 50-mile radius of Buchanan would have either been forced to evacuate or could have suffered from radiation poisoning, which, as we all know, has extremely toxic effects and is extremely life-threatening, threatening to our land, threatening to our water. And I think this is a case where we really saw a huge win for environmental justice. One resource I'd love to share with folks after, if I can maybe send it to Anna, is something, it's called the Red Paper, Why Nuclear is Not Green. And this was written by the Onondaga Nation, as well as the American Indian Law Alliance, talking about the effects of nuclear energy on our Indigenous people. And I think the fact that Indian Point, I mean, it's really built on stolen land, right? We're all on unceded Indigenous nation territory. And just the fact that this nuclear reactor was allowed to operate without the consent of Indigenous peoples, that is a huge injustice that has been going on for decades. So the fact that this nuclear reactor is now closed, and we are instead committed to fulfilling the need for energy with energy efficiency and renewables is a huge win. And so, yeah, we're excited for the work that comes next, which is really building those renewables and creating those green economy jobs. And then one of the last two that I want to talk about, there are more, but just since we're constrained on time, we have worked with a number of different groups to actually stop fossil fuel infrastructure, new fossil fuel infrastructure from being blocked. So the Williams pipeline, I think that's something that our allies in Brooklyn have really been fighting for, and that's now the Williams pipeline, which would have cut through North Brooklyn, which is largely communities of color and largely low-income populations. And of course, building a pipeline through New York City is going to cause a lot of pollution. It's going to cause a lot of interference with the community there already. And that has been now blocked 3 times because activists have put their bodies on the line, have pressured public officials, have done the outreach and talked to their neighbors and community members. And in the end, this is really, it's always a David and Goliath situation when you're going up against an extremely powerful corporation. And so this is a huge win. And similarly in Astoria, there's a fracked gas plant. And sorry, for those of you unfamiliar with Queens, Astoria is located in Queens, New York City. Again, and this is just a terrible place to put a gas plant. Not that we should be building new gas plants anywhere, but just the fact that it's such a dense population. Again, it's a low-income community, a community of color, and just the fact that these gas plants want to continue operating despite the obvious health effects and pollution impacts on those communities. The fact that they were denied their permits is another environmental justice win that I think we should take heart from and keep doing what we're doing. All right, so now I'm going to pass it over to Alison to talk a little bit about ways that you can actually help with advocacy and organizing.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second, just to clarify something? You had mentioned the converting homes to electric, right? So how do you, Jason had a question about how do you ensure that that electric is coming from renewables, or how does that work? Versus like, well, do we have any coal burning plants in New York? Are we getting our electricity at all from coal? I don't think we were.
I don't know locally for sure. But yeah, I mean, I think the idea is that one, all of these homes are more efficient to begin with. We're also advocating for more renewables generally. And some of the homes are specifically also putting in solar, right? They then within the house, they are getting their energy from solar panels as well. So yeah, it's not a perfect system, I think is maybe the best way to answer that.
Yeah.
But I don't know all the ins and outs of, you know, locally where, like kind of what the mix of where our electric comes from. So I don't maybe have the best answer for that. I started last month.
Okay, well, I suppose the question is if you're converting your house to electric, and I mean, Jason, you can interrupt me, you would want your electricity to be coming from a renewable source. And I will say it's a lot easier for electricity to do that. I mean, it's pretty easy. It's really easy to have your electricity coming from a renewable source. You know, solar farms, you can sign up for a company. It costs, it doesn't cost anymore. Sometimes it costs less. If you have a gas dependent system, you can't do anything. You're depending on the gas. Right.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I don't know the ins and outs of that. If Jason, if you do want an answer to it, the best way would be to contact, like to go to the HeatSmart website and ask that question. There's a form to ask the question. So you'll get a lot more specifics that way from some of the experts. Thanks for the question. So moving into ways you can help with advocacy. I have a couple of photos here of lots of different things. You know, it does take all these different angles. So writing, talking, research and analysis, social media skills, art, theater, music, rallies. So it really does take all of those different sides of things. We can go to the next slide. So to give a couple of examples with writing, you can write letters to the editor, draft coalition sign-on letters, draft legislation itself. For talking, speaking at press conference, going door-to-door canvassing like I've done, neighborhood meetings, school events. There's a lot of ways to use talking skills if you have them. With social media, spreading the word about events, giving science and news updates to the public. With research and analysis, you know, there's a lot of crunching numbers that needs to be done, and researching, you know, other environmental policies. There's a lot on that front that can be done as well. We can go to the next slide. Great. So a reflection question, you're welcome to put it in the chat or just ponder it. But what skills, both creative or analytical, do you already have at your disposal? What are you already good at? And where do you want to build your abilities? Is there something that you're like, well, actually, I do want to learn more about that. I want to improve that skill, or I want to get into this realm of work, and therefore I want to have this skill for that. So feel free to throw that in the chat too. We like hearing from you.
Sorry, and I can just say a little bit about this as well. So a frequent phrase that we use is don't agonize, organize. I think it's easy to feel like, you know, we're up against a lot and there's an onslaught of things that we have to both be fighting and advocating for. But if you're curious about how it all works and how we plan to work together, especially this year, what our legislative priorities are to reduce fossil fuel infrastructure and ensure that people can afford heating and cooling in their homes. We're going to be talking, Agree is going to be helping host a town hall. So just getting together with folks who are interested in this topic and really interested in how they can use their voices to get this done. So on December 1st at 6 p.m., we're going to be hosting this town hall. If you go to this link, and I'll put this, I'll send this to Anna as well as that red paper that I had mentioned, but I'll send this link in case anyone would like to join us there.
Can I put a plug in for these alerts? I just want to say, if you're like me, I'm a teacher. I and especially in the last couple of years, are super swamped. But I get the email alerts, and they tell you how to write the letter. They tell you about the issue, and I think it's something that everyone on this call should sign up for, because it's something that you can do to affect local policy. And I think national policy seems so big to me. But the local, like, we don't have fracking in New York because of groups like Agree. We're not like Pennsylvania, where the pipelines are up, the truck traffic is there. I mean, we've prevented that. So if you're someone like me, your job prevents you, at least for 11 months out of the year, from doing much else. I can send a quick email off when I get the alerts to my elected officials.
Thank you, Anna. Appreciate that, and appreciate your work with us. So now I'm going to pass the mic to Alison. I don't know if we have time for a quick closing, but Alison has something really special for us if we do have time for that.
Yeah, we have time.
Great.
Awesome.
And just to plug there was one other event there. I put it in the chat as well, but there's a climate change theater action event. So that's at Art Rage Gallery, December 11th. So I posted the Facebook event for it. So that's another way, having plays and creativity. And I would love to share a song with you. The words are there on the screen, and also I just put them in the chat. And feel free to sing along. We can't see most of you, so no need to be embarrassed when you belt along. This is a song I love, and it's called "The Tide is Rising." It's by Annie Patterson. Please sing along if you'd like. The tide is rising, and so are we. The tide is rising, and so are we. The tide is rising, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be. The task is mighty, and so are we. The task is mighty, and so are we. The task is mighty, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be. The storm is raging, and so are we. The storm is raging, and so are we. The storm is raging, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be. The world is ready, and so are we. The world is ready, and so are we. The world is ready, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be. The land is holy, and so are we. The land is holy, and so are we. The land is holy, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be. Oh my gosh. They're waving along. That's great. I like the swaying. Dryden High School.
Yeah, that's great.
Beautiful.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Allison. And I
Thanks.
just, the last thing I wanted to say is that I'm just putting my email in the chat. If anyone wants to contact me with any questions, happy to field them, even if it's just like questions about how you can get involved, or like, I don't know what to do next, or I don't know what I should do. How do I move forward? I'm so happy to chat with you, and yeah, just be a resource if I can. So please do reach out if you need.
Thank you. So I guess I would say next up would be, and Jason or anyone, I have Beth's email with all the links in it. I don't have the Google Doc. I don't know if we should put that in the chat. If people want to choose their 11 o'clock session, there's one on recycling and upcycling and sustainable food systems.
Yeah, so next on this link, Anna, is the Todd McLane, Tompkins Cortland County Community College speaker. And then
Okay.
if they want to switch to the other site, that's the Okra speaker.
Okay. Okay. All right. Great. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
I'm going
everyone.
to recycling. I might switch back to this. I can't decide. Bye.
All right. Hello, everybody. Is Mr. McLane on our link here? I don't see. Let me see if I have any.
We're watching the same lecture. Are you doing the first one, the food systems one? Are you doing the other one?
Has Mr. McLane joined yet? I don't see him, right?
No, I don't see him.
Mr. McLean is on his way.
I think I saw him join.
There
Hi,
he is.
I am here. I I pressed the wrong Zoom link before.
fantastic. Welcome.
All good.
I will give you a brief introduction and let you go.
Sure.
All right, this is Mr. McLane. He's the director of the TC3 farm. He originally hails from Central New York and is a graduate of the University at Albany. Todd's passion for having a positive impact on his community led him to pursue a career in agriculture. Growing high quality and healthy food wasn't enough for him though. He wanted to educate and inspire folks about local food. This led him to the TC3 farm, which is a part of the Farm to Bistro initiative. The TC3 farm directly supports the Associates of Applied Science degree program for sustainable farming and food systems. In addition to being the farm director, he's also an adjunct assistant professor teaching various courses in the Sustainable Farming and Food Systems program. He's also involved with Groundswell Center for Local Food and Farming, a local nonprofit focused on building a just and equitable food system. Since 2008, first as a farmer educator and currently the co-chair of the board of directors. He has served on various area agriculture committees over the years, including the Ithacus Farmer Market and Healthy Food for All. Currently, he's on the Agriculture and Horticulture Committee at Cornell Cooperative Extension. He also has served as a mentor for beginning farmers through NOFA New York. His talk today is on building resilience through sustainable farming and strength in local food systems. So, Mr. McLane, thank you so much for coming. We're really excited to hear from you.
Great. Thanks so much for having me. This is new and uncharted territory for me to do a presentation via Zoom. I'm usually a little bit more interactive in person, so hopefully the things I have in play for some interactive stuff works out. Christina, am I a co-host? Would I be able to?
I do believe you are able to share and have co-host abilities.
What about what about if I wanted to do breakout rooms at some point? Or
I don't know. I might have to defer on Travis to that one.
Okay.
Do we have the ability to make breakout rooms?
I'm not sure. Travis will be the one. Looks like Travis is here, but he may be busy with the other.
He might be, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of towards the end I have here. So, so if it works out, great.
I'll send Travis a message real quick.
Yeah. If it doesn't, we'll just have a conversation with that. So, all right, let's see here. Share the screen. So folks should be able to see.
Yep, we can see it.
Awesome. All right, great. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I hope everyone's doing well on this chilly November morning. As Ms. Costa said, I am Todd McLane, and I'm the director of the TC3 farm. And I've been involved with agriculture for close to the last 20 years, and in the last 10 years or so, really been combining that with a lot of food systems work. And that's what I do here at Tompkins Courtleigh Community College. So I'm really excited to share some of this information. And today, we're going to explore a little bit about sustainable farming and sustainable agriculture and the different practices and the impacts that they could have on climate change, and some ways that we can look to build our strength and resilience in our local food system and the impact that that can have, not only with agriculture, but when we think about our ever-changing climate. So a little housekeeping. If folks have questions, I think we can just put them in the chat, and then we'll have time at the end for that. We'll have a few minutes at the end. Let's see the chat coming in here. Okay, awesome. Thank you, Travis. I'll let you know when that needs to happen. All right, great. All right, so let's see if my first thing works here. All right, so do folks have access to a computer in front of them?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I would like you to, so what if everyone hasn't used a Mentimeter poll, if you can go to www.menti.com, and here's a code that you're gonna have to enter. And the question is, what does sustainable agriculture mean to you? go ahead, should have a screen where you can type in some answers there. Should be able to see the code right at the top of the screen there. Okay, great. Keep on popping some in there. Excellent. Great. Yeah, we'll do another minute or so here for getting some more in there. These are all great. Right. Any last, get some last ones in there. Ooh, I like biodiversity. Good one. Efficient. Excellent. Awesome. All right, great. These are some really great answers and definitions that you have here. We're gonna switch back to our other. All right, so that was great. So according to in the Farm Bill, sustainable agriculture is an integrated system of plant and animal production practices that have a site-specific application that will, over the long term, so we're thinking long term here, satisfy human and fiber needs, enhance environmental quality and the natural resources based upon which agricultural economy depends, make the most efficient use of non-renewable resources and on-farm resources, and integrate, where appropriate, natural biological cycles and controls, sustain the economic viability of farm operations, enhance the quality of life for farmers and society as a whole. So a lot of those things that folks have put in that little word bubble there covers some of this stuff. So we're going to look into some of these different aspects of sustainable agriculture a little bit more thoroughly here, and think about how that impacts us as we move forward in an ever-changing environmental world. So there are three basic goals that we're looking at when we're thinking about sustainable agriculture. And all of these are impacted by climate change and the strength of our local food system. So the first one is environmental health. The second one that we have is economic profitability. And lastly, if folks are familiar, when we're thinking about social and economic equity. So we're not just thinking about equity with profitability, but we're also thinking about the impact that we have on our community, our farm owners, our farm workers, and the land that we're working on. UC Davis, University of California, Davis has an amazing sustainable ag research program. And this little sorry about that, go back one. This excerpt here is something that really stuck out to me. It's significantly longer, but I thought the first and the last paragraph were particularly important and present to what we're talking about today. So the first thing that they say is sustainability rests on the principle that we must meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Therefore, stewardship of both natural and human resources is of prime importance. So when we're thinking about, an agricultural system, when we're thinking about our farming practices, we're not just thinking about the season that we're in, our marketing channels. What we really need to do is think about how our farming practices are affecting things in the long term. And that should always be of utmost importance when we're thinking about and looking at our farming practices across the country and across the globe, because we are part of a global food system. We're going to talk a little bit more about strengthening our local food system, but we really need to think about our impact going across all sectors of agriculture, whether it's from home gardening to the large international operations. And then this is the last paragraph that I thought was, again, particularly profound. So finally, it is important to point out that reaching toward the goal of sustainable agriculture is the responsibility of all participants in the system, including farmers, laborers, policymakers, researchers, retailers, and consumers. Each group has its own part to play and its own unique contribution to make strengthen the sustainable agricultural community. So, that's one thing that really stands out to me when we think about, what role can we play? And we all play the role of consumer. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more as we move into a little brief discussion about food systems. But, a lot of folks think that they don't have that power or that impact that they can play when we think about the agricultural production techniques in our country. So thinking about yourselves, you all have one aspect to play, or many aspects. So the first aspect of our farming, is that we're thinking about farming and our natural resources. The first thing that we think about with farming is water and irrigation needs. And if we look at studies over the last 20 years, annual precipitation rates have been about the same, but what we're starting to see is more intense rain events or precipitation events where we're getting 4 or 5 inches of rain in just 1 week. So one thing that we need, things that we need to think about are our conservation and storage techniques of water, because we're going with periods of high rain and then periods of drought and low rain. And that even here in the Northeast, where we have a plentiful supply of water, these are still issues that we've seen over the last 5 to 10 years in agriculture. Thinking about the crop varieties that we grow. Do we have varieties that are a little bit more tolerant to drought or the ever-changing landscape that we're dealing with? So, not only drought tolerant crops, but, crops that are varieties that are tolerant to all sorts of weather conditions. So it could be a lot of wetness, a lot of cold, so thinking about also with water conservation is reduced irrigation. A lot of the larger scale farms in the area or across the country may use large sprinklers, but we want to think about efficiency when it comes to irrigation. So different irrigation techniques would be using drip irrigation, where we're just really concentrating on watering our crops and not the entire field. And then that, will affect our crop management. So using different cultural practices where we're thinking about mulching, and using whether it's straw mulch or plastic mulch. There's different types of mulches that we can use when we think about that crop management and that crop production techniques there. The other natural resource and a farming resource that's crucial is energy uses. And, we are in post-peak oil, so we want to think about how can we move away from non-renewable energy sources and how that impact that it has on our environmental health. So we think about, you know, our tillage techniques, our farming practices, and that ties into our soil erosion, because we're depleting constant tillage of our soil, constant tractor usage, we're depleting our soil landscape. And so if we can move to reduced or no-till farming, that's a way that will help solve issues with soil erosion, but also that energy usage. Air quality is another huge thing that we need to think about when we think about the energy uses that farms and tractors and the equipments that folks are using. That definitely impacts the air that we have around us and our environment. And we think about how moving to low-till techniques and reduced tillage techniques will also impact our air quality. And if folks aren't familiar with cover cropping is a way to not only increase organic matter, to increase soil health, but also to reduce soil erosion and suppress weeds. The next aspect of sustainable agriculture that we're thinking about is our plant production. So we're going to talk a little bit about both plant production and animal production today. So the first and foremost is that we want to think about variety selection. So the different crops that we're growing, you know, there's hundreds and hundreds of varieties. You know, on our farm here, we grow about 30 different varieties of tomatoes. And so when we're thinking about our variety selection, we're thinking about disease-resistant varieties, because when plants are susceptible to disease, they yield is lower, but then they're also susceptible to pest pressure. And so there's 3 different main types of plant varieties. And this is actually, maybe we could put this in the chat here. Does anyone know that the 3 seed types that we have when it comes to vegetables or plant production? You can also unmute and shout it out.
I think you stumped us, Todd.
Anyone?
We've got heirloom in the chat.
Yes, heirloom, excellent. And there's 2 other main seed types.
Like beefsteak or something?
That would be a type of tomato. That would be a crop type. But yes. Oh, I see in this second. Oh, GMO. All right, we will talk about GMO briefly, but that is not one of the 3 that we're looking at here. All right. I'll give you the answers. So the first one, heirloom, is great. So heirloom varieties are most commonly found in tomato varieties. And heirloom variety are seed types where their genetic makeup hasn't been altered for 100 years or more. So these are crops that have been around. They're usually a little bit funkier in color, but have superior taste. You know, they look a little bit crazy, especially with tomatoes. If you've grown heirloom tomatoes at home, they can come in all different shapes and sizes, stripes, you know, 1 pound, you know, they can be 2 ounces. They're all over the place. But with heirloom varieties, even though their genetic makeup hasn't been changed over years, they tend to be a little bit more disease susceptible. And so the other main type would be a hybrid variety. And so hybrid varieties and hybrids and GMOs get confused quite a bit. And so when we're looking at hybrid varieties, these are varieties that are bred through plant breeding, where there's multiple generations where they have 2 or more parents. And what they're doing is they're constantly crossing these breeds for disease resistance, plant yield, flavor, pest resistance. And so all of these, and depending on what your farming practices are, hybrid varieties can come in extremely handy. And I'll give an example. Like on our farm here, we use organic practices, but we don't use any organic pesticides or organic fungicides. So we don't use any sprays on our farm at all. So what's really important for us is to have varieties that we grow that are disease resistant. And so, we look at plant breeders across the, the country, and Cornell is right here, and they've been coming up with a lot of great varieties over the last 5, 10, 20 years that are well adapted to our region. And plant breeding, in the next 5, 10, 20 years in the future is going to become even more important when we're looking at these varieties, or we're looking at this ever-changing landscape that we're dealing with weather and the fact that we can't always rely on what's going to happen year after year. So having varieties that have these capabilities to perform in a variety of conditions is really important. Now, GMO was thrown in the chat there. And so GMO stands for genetically modified organism. And I'm not gonna, there's a lot of debate over if GMOs are good or bad. I think they hold a certain place in agriculture, especially in the international agricultural community. But a GMO is where the DNA of the plant structure has been altered. And usually what you see with GMOs, sometimes it is for increased yield, but sometimes the DNA has been changed to add a pesticide in there. So the plant is growing with a pesticide in there. And so that's something that most small scale farmers are not using. And the third type of plant variety that I like to throw in there is an open pollinated variety. And so open pollinated varieties are similar to heirloom varieties in which their genetic makeup hasn't been changed, but they're just younger varieties. They haven't been around for more than 100 years. So those are our 3 types of things, and 3 types of plant varieties. And so, hybrids can play a really important part when we're thinking about resiliency with a changing climate. The next one here, let's see if that comes up, is diversification. So plant diversity is really another crucial aspect of sustainable agriculture. We see a lot of farms across our landscape that would be considered monoculture farms, where they're only growing one crop a season. They may be rotating those crops between, we see corn and then soybeans and maybe sunflowers over, a 2 or 3 year rotation. But diversification within a farm, within each season that you're doing is really crucial, especially with the weather issues that we're dealing with. It's that thought of not putting all of your eggs in one basket. And a really good example of that is, when every year, we sell plants at the beginning of the season, seedlings for home gardeners. And the number one question I get is there going to be blight this year? And so have folks heard of blight? I only see two faces. So I see a couple nods there. So you can put that in the chat if you want. All right. Yep. Okay. So we got a yep. And so there's actually multiple. And so what folks are referring to, there's 2 types of disease, 2 types of disease that affect both potatoes and tomatoes. So they're both in the nightshade family, and that disease is called late blight. And so there's another blight called early blight, and which happens earlier in the season, and that really only affects the foliage of a plant. Late blight, hence its name, usually happens much later in the season. So we're looking at, September, late September, early October, where most, and in the past, farmers didn't really, and even gardeners didn't really worry about it, because late blight happened when our crops, our plants were pretty much done producing. But what we saw, and I'm guessing this was probably about 8 or 9 years ago, we had a huge outbreak of late blight that happened in July, where a lot of fruit on these tomato plants were green and were infected with this late blight. And so late blight is a fungal disease that its spores can travel up to 1 mile at a time. So when you think about how that can move across, with wind from gardens to farms to gardens across the country, it can actually sweep across the country and really devastate crops. And the year that it happened in July was, the farm that I was managing and working on at that time, the first day we found late blight, we pulled out 700 plants on our farm, and we grew about 2,000 tomato plants in our field. And over the next 3 weeks, we proceeded to pull out probably the remaining 1,300 plants, and we estimated that we lost about $30,000 in tomato sales that year. And that is, could be devastating for a small farm. But the fact that we were growing 30, 40 different types of vegetables, that impact, we felt it, but it wasn't a complete loss on our farm season. We had a complete loss on that crop just about, but we didn't have a complete loss on the farm season. So that diversification and growing a number of different crops over the course of the year, isn't going to necessarily, is definitely going to help, but it also has all these other benefits. Different crops take up different nutrients from the soil. And we're going to talk about soil health shortly, but that's our most important aspect. So having this diversification in our crop mix is going to be really important when we think about how we're dealing, how the weather is going to impact farm seasons over the next couple of years. Let's see if this works here. Let's see. All right, here we go. Soil health. So soil health is probably the #1 thing that we're concerned about in agriculture. I look at all aspects of farming as fairly unnatural from what the plants want to do. All the plants that we grow, all they want to do is reproduce. And we're kind of cultivating them and growing them and using techniques for our own our end game conditions when we think about our marketing channels and how we're going to sell this and where we're going to sell this. But really what we're looking at is the health of our soil. And so we have to think about the farming techniques that we use, whether it's farming techniques or cultural practices, the different things that we can do over the course of the season to improve our soil health. Because basically, even it doesn't matter what type of farming you're doing, if you're a chemically based farmer, which is also called conventional farming, I think we should change that name, but I like to call it chemically based farming. And then if you're certified organic or sustainable, or, all these terms are slightly interchangeable, we're still taking nutrients away from the soil. And so we want to think about how are we giving back to the soil. So cover cropping is one of those really important aspects. And cover cropping is also known as green manure, where we would be planting legumes, grasses, different cereals, which are nitrogen fixers. They might be just high in organic matter. And these are all things that are crucial for successful growing of vegetables, fruits, and even raising livestock. When we think about our soil health and we think about what we're putting into our bodies or putting into animals' bodies. The other things that we can do for soil health, and it goes back to that soil erosion that we're thinking about, is weed suppression, soil moisture retention, and then a big thing when we think about in soil health is crop rotation. And so that's where a small scale diversified farm, even some larger scale farms, that crop rotation is really important. You can kind of do the thumbs up thing. If you've has anyone heard the term crop rotation before? Yes, I see 2 thumbs ups. That's all I see. So we'll say that everyone else has kind of heard of it too. But if you haven't, we think about when crop rotation is not planting the same thing in the same year, same spot year after year. And in an organic system, what we see is usually like a 3-year rotation is really good. Ideally, if you can do 5 years or 7 years, that doesn't always happen because land access and land size that's available to farms is limited. But with that crop rotation, we're thinking about nutrient management with crop rotation. Oops, apologize, we'll get to that in a sec. Nutrient management, but also pest management. Most crops that we grow have pest-specific crops. And so if we think about, ourselves walking around a field, it doesn't take us too long. But a lot of time in the fall, what we're seeing now is these pests that we've had on our farm, they're laying their eggs in the soil. And if we planted broccoli in the same spot where we planted broccoli in the fall, in the spring, those little cabbage loopers and flea beetles will emerge and their host plant will be right there. So by being able to rotate our crops, we're giving what we're growing a little bit of a head start on that competition with their pests that they have to deal with. So that's another really important aspect of our soil health. Use of inputs here. So lots of farms rely on inputs. And so when we think about inputs, we're talking about compost and fertilizers. And so many farms would use what's called external inputs, where they're bringing in compost or they're bringing in fertilization, they're bringing in mulch, they're bringing in straw from other farms. And so there's energy that's being used for that. When we think about transportation, getting inputs from one area to another area, and also knowing the source of those inputs. So if you're bringing in compost from a dairy farm, knowing those farming practices of that farm can be crucial when we're thinking about the production of our plants moving forward. And I look at the same thing with mulches as well, where straw mulch could have a lot of weed seeds in it. And so you could be introducing new weeds to your farm. You can be introducing new pathogens to your farm that could then have an impact on how you're going to deal with that. And so that's something that, we want to think about. So that's where kind of thinking about a closed loop system where you can, whether you're incorporating livestock production into your farm, where you can really have control over what kind of fertilization is happening. And also when we think about, cover cropping and those green manures, where you can move away from these external inputs and compost, where there's different nutrients that we can utilize through cover cropping and give back to our soil that way. And that's where we have to also think about what type of farming practices that we use. And there's 2 main farming practices when we're thinking about plant production, and that would be bio-intensive versus bio-extensive. And bio-intensive farming is basically using all available land. And so when we're thinking about the long-term sustainability of our farm and our soil, using a bio-intensive operation is really something that we want to move away from, because if we're depleting the nutrients in our soil year after year after year after year, then we're relying more heavily on external inputs and all sorts of energy. And we think about the energy usage that takes for that. So in a bio-extensive operation is that we're only using a portion of the land that we have available to us. So let's say if it's, even if it's 1 acre, you only use a quarter acre of that year, up to a half acre each year. So then you can really rely on, resting soil, which is really important. That's one of those crucial things. Letting soil be fallow, getting a cover crop in that can be used for an entire year, where you're building up organic matter and soil health there. So there's always that balance, and the goal, for every operation is to be bioextensive. But there's definitely limitations to that. And when we think about rural development and land development, that's one of the things that is not always available to us that way. And then lastly, when we think about in any type of agriculture, is the lifestyle choice of the farmer. Thinking about, what are your marketing channels? How do you, all that can impact, your production technique. So that, we always think about, I tell my students all the time, you can't have sustainable agriculture if your workers or your farmers aren't sustainable. And we can't, those days of working 12, 15-hour days, 7 days a week, really isn't long-term sustainable for our farmers across the nation there. So next we're going to talk, let's see a little chat here. Okay. All right, we'll hold this. We're gonna, because this kind of plays into our food system talk, but yeah, thanks, Jason. And if we don't cover it, we'll make sure that gets to the end there. But all right, let's see here. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about animal production now. Okay, the first thing that we think about in animal production, or I like to say protein production, is thinking about all of the aspects of managing that crop. Because raising animals is raising a crop, and are you raising grass and having animals go through your grass, or you're raising animals that end up being on grass? And so when you're thinking about the management, you're thinking about the animal type that you're going to be using, the land. Does the land match the type of animal that you want to raise? The labor practices, the needs for animal health. So the whole planning that goes into some type of animal and protein operation. And this is where we think about the selection of the animal. We think about how do these animals produce and the size and the land space that they need. And so do animals impact the environment? This is going to be a question. What do animals, especially when we think about dairy and beef cattle, what's something that they give off that can have a negative impact on our environment? You can just throw that in the chat if you've got it, or shout it out. Yes, methane. Methane is a huge, and especially in grass-fed operations. Everyone talks about grass-fed, cattle operations. Methane it's the highest production in cattle operations. So we're thinking about other ruminants. So sheep and goats are smaller animals, that are still produce protein, still are good for our environment, that produce much less methane than cattle do. So that's one thing to think about when we're thinking about our environment. What kind of animals are we raising? What kind of animals are we eating? If we eat animals, use that protein, but we want to think about does the animal selection match up with our operations that we have? All right. And so we also have the health of our animals. We think about reproduction, we think about the nutrition, whether they're 100% grass fed, are they finished on grass, what kind of grains are they using, what kind of impact and energy is used to produce you know, the foods that they need and our health, and we think about our, you know, giving animals antibiotics and how that gets passed through, you know, into the meat that we eat. And so, you know, just always thinking about the health of our animals and what kind of impact that has on the production and our environment. And then lastly, and we just touched on this with, you know, the methane production, but we think about the grazing management of animals and confined operations. And so you may have heard the term CAFOs before. Those are contained animal feed operations. So CAFOs, there's a lot of controversy over them in terms of the conditions that the animals are in, waste management that you have to think about with CAFOs and the environmental impacts that that has. But then when we think about on the flip side with, you know, the grazing management, we want to think about the infrastructure that's needed for grazing. You know, one of the biggest things that we need to think about for infrastructure is fencing needs. You know, and is it economical to use permanent fencing? You know, or the capabilities? Do you have the labor for, you know, fencing that is movable and not permanent and having to move it around? You know, if folks have raised sheep or pigs and used electronet fencing and rotated your animals and seen how much work it takes to move that fencing, you know, every couple days, you know, those are considerations to think about when we're looking at our animal production. The last aspect that we want to look at when we're thinking about sustainable agriculture are the economic and political and social needs. And this is something that often is not valued, I think, by consumers and folks that are not doing this work day in and day out. But this is something that's really crucial in terms of the long-term viability of agriculture, you know, not only in our region, but across our country and across the world. And so the first thing we want to think about is the different types of agricultural policy and what kind of incentives are for farms to use crops or different farming techniques that use conservation. So are there tax credits, you know, whether local governments, but we want to think about what kind of incentives are we giving to farmers for producing food or raising animals in a more sustainable way that's going to have a positive impact on our environmental health, because that really should be first and foremost. And ag policy can be on a municipal, local level when we think about that. You know, it doesn't have to just be on a national level when we're thinking about the Farm Bill or different aspects of tax credits or incentives for farms. The next thing is we want to think about land use. You know, development is really, that's some of farming's, especially for beginning farmers, but access to land is one of the limiting factors, one of the biggest limiting factors for beginning farmers. And the reason why access to land, and when we're thinking about quality land, you know, all the nice flat land as these, you know, urban and suburban areas keep pushing out, those are really valued. You know, in Tompkins County, you know, an acre of land can go for around $10,000, you know, and so we think about, you know, a 50-acre piece of property. So there's all this competition with land. And, you know, as the suburbs push out, what we also have to think about when we're thinking about our farming techniques is that farms are now closer to larger populations. And so we think about, you know, our spray, Is there a lot of tractor usage, with the byproducts from that, and also more tractors on the road? Here we are in Central New York. Everyone's probably had that day where they're banging their head on the steering wheel, but like, I can't believe I'm stuck behind another tractor. And that's going to become more and more common as these suburban areas get pushed out more into our rural areas. So we want to think about our land usage and how that impacts the environment as a whole. This is probably, for me, labor practices should be, the exploitation of farm workers across the world is really, understated. And so when we think about, the farming practices, and even in organic agriculture, I think a lot of folks, think organic agriculture is better. We could probably have a 3-hour or 3-day or a 3-week conversation. Is organic better? But one of the things that we think about, especially even in organic farms, is the labor conditions that folks have to work, whether it's long days without proper, shade or breaks or bathrooms. We think how, what are the wages that folks are being paid? If we're relying on migrant labor or seasonal labor, are we providing housing, and what type of housing? So we want to think about all these kind of things that go into our labor practices. How far does someone have to commute? We think about carbon footprint all the time. And so, are we giving housing on the farm or near the farm versus, ways that, that folks have to do. And then lastly, and this is kind of where we all fall in, is consumers. And education of consumers, because I think it's really easy for us as consumers to kind of not think about what goes into the production of our food. Whether it's that land use or the people who are growing your food and what kind of conditions. I think about, I don't know if folks have seen in the last, couple years, about with the wildfires that have been happening out west. And there's been some really iconic images of, farm laborers working in the fields and all this smoke and smog and horrible conditions with these giant flames behind them. And so we think about, what really happens and what goes into, our food production. And as consumers, I think that that's a really important thing for us to understand and think about when we make our food choices. And so that kind of segues us right into our food system. And what we're going to focus on now is thinking about our local food system and what kind of impacts that we can have in that. So I don't know if folks have seen this before, but there are 6 major components that make up our food system. The first is the production, whether that is animal production, vegetable production. We think about the processing, we think about the distribution, in distribution, or, there's vehicle usage, transportation is used in all aspects of our food system. The retail aspect of where we're buying our food, where we're getting our food, consumption ties right into that. And then waste is a crucial thing. If folks are unaware, in the US, we waste about 40%, 38% of the food that we buy each year. Ooh, okay, we'll get to that at the end. That's a great question there. So we want to think about, let me get this chat. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so when we're looking at all these different ideas, we all play that role as consumer, but we also can all impact, when we think about trying to strengthen our local, one of the biggest things when we're looking at our local food system is strengthening that local economy. And we think about the carbon footprint of our food. And so, you know, food miles, most of the food miles that we have is that food travels about 2,500 miles to get to our plate. And there's lots of transportation, there's lots of distribution that's involved in all those different steps. And so if we can centralize and localize these different aspects of our food system, we're then going to have a greater impact when it comes to affecting our climate in the future, because, you know, our carbon, we're going to decrease our carbon footprint if we're buying local, you know, if we're raising our own animals, or if we're growing our own food in our gardens. You know, processing is a huge thing, and you know, and that's one of the biggest weakest links in our food system, especially our food system, our local food system, is processing. You know, most farms, if you're unaware, if they're going to process most of those cuts of meat that you buy at a farmer's market, you know, those farms have to make an appointment a year out, because there's limited amount of processors, and they have to be USDA certified, that are available for farms in our region. So that's a huge issue when we think about that. You know, we talked about the distribution, you know, more and more availability in terms of markets. We're seeing, you know, we have the larger farmers markets, you know, both in Ithaca and the Syracuse regional market, but there's, you know, a lot of the smaller communities in the area are popping up with their own farmers markets. There's local grocers. There's local food distributors when we're thinking about food hubs and other aspects. And then the biggest thing that we all, you know, that role that we can play is thinking about where we're consuming food. Are we going to restaurants that are supporting local farms? Or are we going to chain restaurants? You know, are we preserving food, you know, so we don't have to rely on getting tomatoes in the winter. You know, we have to change our eating habits a little bit when we think about strengthening that food system. You know, and then lastly, you know, with waste recovery, you know, with that 40% waste that we have, 38% waste that we have in our country, most of that food is ending up in the landfill. You know, and you know, where a lot of that food, you know, composting education, or having composting facilities that are available with, even in urban settings, or in areas where you don't have small, you know, there might be things that your community and your town, you know, regulations that they have, that there's no composting, but, you know, trying to think about innovative ways that we can do waste recovery is definitely going to impact, you know, our food system, and also that long-term viability of the environmental health that we have. So we've got another Menti poll coming up here. So if that can go in the chat. Ooh, okay. Thanks, Jason. I didn't realize that we were running out of time here. Okay, so go ahead and let's open that up here. We're gonna finish up. So hold on. Let's go to that Menti poll. Sorry about that. Right. Okay. Excellent. We got one vote for all of the above here. It's what aspect of the food system do you think is most important? So do you think food production, you know, the consumption aspect, you know, this, whatever you feel as is the most important aspect to help in our food system. Food waste, it's another good one. Excellent. All right, we'll finish up right there. And I think since we are running out of time here, I think we can have maybe a few minutes for a couple questions that I saw there. And I don't think in terms of this question here, I don't know if there is a right or a wrong answer. This is really, and this is one of those things where, we all play that role, and how we support and how we utilize farms in our area can really kind of have that positive impact there. So let's see if we have a couple questions.
We had a couple questions in the chat, but I can open it up to see if anybody else has a couple questions in the next few minutes. One of the questions in the chat was, what can the students do in terms of, maybe consumer choices or things like that, avoid certain companies, various products?
Yeah, so that's great, and that was going to be a kind of our break. That was the question that was kind of go into our breakout rooms and thinking about what we could do. As that, what differences can we make, or what impacts then we can make? And I think really the biggest thing is I think as students and just even is looking at our consumption practices and where we're buying food, what kind of are we getting involved in joining the CSA, community supported agriculture, going to the markets, because that's really when you're supporting local farms, that's keeping money in your community. And I think that's one of the biggest impacts that we can have. My personal belief is buying local is more important than buying organic. Because there's lots of local farms who may not be certified organic or have that organic label, but if you get to know them and you learn their farming practices, you may find out that they are organic. They just don't have that label. The USDA and the National Organic Program sets up a lot of regulations for what can be called certified organic. But we want to think about our carbon footprint. I think carbon footprint is really important when we think about buying local versus buying organic. If you could buy local and organic, that's great, but I would say that buying local is more important than buying organic. But I'm sure there's probably lots of folks in the world that disagree with that. But
no, I really appreciate that honest answer. That was really great. So I think we will go ahead and wrap up so we can head back. But do we have any more questions before we end here? I want to thank you so much for coming to speak with us today. That was great.
Yeah, no problem. Hopefully in the future we can do this in person.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Can I distribute your email address?
Yeah, for sure. Yep.
Right.
My
Perfect.
email address, and we got all the social stuff, but email is probably the best way to get in touch with me.
All right. I really appreciate your time this morning.
No problem at all. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Todd. This was great.
No problem at all.
It's a lot of information to try to squeeze into 45 minutes.
I know.
I teach a lot of these topics in my class.
I know. I was like, I was like, oh, what do I cut here? But yeah, no, this is great. I mean, and I'm just like, I'm so glad that you all are having agriculture and food system kind of stuff, but how that impacts our climate, and because I think it does go hand in hand with as we move forward. So I appreciate you all giving me the time to be here with you this morning.
Absolutely. So for the rest of you, we're going to stick around and wait for everybody else to join us back here again, and then we'll talk about climate action plans.
Jason, just give me clearance from the tower and then I'll, I'll take it away. Just whenever you think we're ready, okay?
Yeah, I think we're all set. The talk
Good.
from Todd is done. We're all just hanging out waiting for you.
Okay. All right, well, I just want to say first, thank you to all the presenters. You offered, you really are experts in your field. Whether you're younger or older, you've all offered very unique perspectives on really varied topics that'll help, I think, these students help make a little bit of a difference. So thank you very much. The last part of this whole day is the action planning, because you got a lot of information here, but you have to really turn that information into action. That's really what the goal is. So this last part, it's going to be a little bit open-ended. It's all about you and your group. We do have on our webpage a template for a climate action plan. It was developed by the Wild Center up north. And it really is a good framework for activities and a way that you can kind of step by step go through, and a process that includes lots of goal setting, IDing areas, developing ways that your school and community can change to have a positive impact on the climate and environment. You're not required by any means to fulfill this action plan today. In fact, some of you might have your own action plan already developed, or you might be in varying stages. If you do go on our website and pull up this action plan, there's a number of steps, obviously, that really you should follow to implement this. So it's all up to you at this point. We're going to take this time and let you guys, kind of like I said, it's going to be all on you, and it depends on where you are and where you're at. Some of you might have an environmental club that's here. Some just might have a group of students. So we're all in different spots, and that's okay. This action plan is just, again, meant to kind of give you a pathway to do some of these activities that really will make a positive impact. So with that, I'll turn it over to your individual groups. Please feel free to access our action plan on our website. If today you get through a few steps, that's great. If today it's just looking at it, tabling it for another time, and meeting with those students and with that group another time to brainstorm and begin this whole journey, that's okay too. All right. So we really want you to understand that. But we'd really like to say thank you to everybody. Thank you to the presenters. Thank you for the guys that are the students that have attended here today. It was a great morning. It really was. Thank you to the Central New York Region Master Teachers that helped put this on. All right. Really, without a consortium like this, stuff doesn't get done. So good luck. Take this, run with it. And the bottom line is, turn all this great information, turn it into action. All right. Again, thanks again from everyone involved here. And we hope to see you soon.